So a very warm welcome to everyone to today's webinar, which is about the research problem and the solution bias. And we hope that a general learning outcome would be for you to get a clearer understanding of the research problems and to raise awareness that we live in a solution-based world. And we will look into that in detail during the webinar. And specific learning outcomes that we hope you take away is that you know what constitutes a research problem in the first place, to understand whether the research problem is a start point or the end point of your research journey. Think about inductive, deductive. Reflect on the solution bias and the role of habits in that bias, and then to learn on how to keep problem focus, establish and keep it. And fifth, to understand the solution bias of search tools, such as Google, Bing, whatever is your search engine of your choice, and also in information, and to get a better perception on the difference between problems as such and research problems. Then, towards the end, we will jointly reflect on the role of guides and the different lenses that we might use to interpret guides and information provided in there. And then we go off the record, and you will have the opportunity to ask questions and to discuss, and we will have some group discussion and close the webinar with that. So let's start with what constitutes a research problem in the first instance. Now, I have small kids, they just went from Form 1 to Form 2, and in school, you pretty much learn what is a problem and what is a solution. Now, a problem is what goes wrong, a challenge or an obstacle. And a solution is something that you use to fix the problem. So if Sam hit his head and got a big bump, then he got an ice pack and put it on his head so for the bump to disappear. So the problem and the solution must fit together. Unfortunately, however, what we immediately do once we hit our heads, we ask for ice. We don't look into the situation like, why did I hit my head in the first instance? What happened here? So this is a problem end, and this is the entire left side, what research is about. Now, where research students, however, often want to go to is the solution side. They want to get the ice pack as quickly as possible, and they don't want to understand why Sam has been hitting his head. Now, understand, research is the left side, not the right side. Now, let's look into that further. A problem is not a solution. For example, the problem is that we need to reduce our high employee fluctuation rate. Now, reducing high fluctuation rate is obviously the outcome expectation that we want. The solution, but why are the fluctuation rates so high in the first instance? Now, this is not clear, right? And also in this example sentence, I mean, you can't stop at the need. The problem is that we need, right? If a student talks like that to his supervisor, the supervisor immediately knows from the word need on, the student is lost because he already looks for the solution. The problem is that we need. The problem was not even named or really introduced in the first instance, but immediately the need comes in to get something, to get the ice pack. Now, a research problem is also not, and quite obviously, but often goes wrong there, it's not a question. Now, if the question, for example, is, how does divorce influence children's social development? Okay, there is a problem perhaps beneath that. What effect does divorce have on children? Well, there also could be a problem. How will the aftermath of divorce affect humanity? Well, this is obviously quite solution focused, so it's not. So what could be the context of a research problem that fits to the question? Could be time related, place related, event related, person related, and we will look into a matching research problem that would fit the question. So there's a relation in between a research question and a research problem, but there is not such thing like the research question being a synonym for the problem. Now, if the question would be, how does divorce influence children's social development? Then a matching research problem from which such question could have been derived would have been a recent study across the US has shown that the social development of primary school children of divorced parents is 2 years behind the development of children from non-divorced parents. Now, this is a clear problem. We don't want a child to be behind in the development. So the question that can be asked from that problem is, how does divorce influence children on social development? Obviously, here we know already the answer. Now, a research problem is also not a title. The title and the research problem are related as much as the question and the problem are related, but they are also distinctly different. Now, if the title is, for example, side effects of chemotherapy, then the research problem might be that nausea and vomiting are common side effects among patients and chemotherapy, and interventions to date have been only moderately successful in reducing these effects. So there's a clear problem in it. New interventions that can reduce or prevent these side effects need to be identified. Now, this is already a research objective. So, but you see, the title and the problem are different. As an example, reviewing the market positioning strategy to understand nonlinear organizational factors affects the effectiveness of the organization capabilities. Now, this does clearly not show a problem, right? We need to write more funding proposals since 9 out of 10 funding proposals do not make it through. Now, this is an opinion. We need to do something. We need to get at least 5 funding proposals funded per year. It's also an opinion. We need to do something. So this is not a problem. Therefore, we need to write at least 50 funding proposals. So how can we motivate our scientists to write more funding proposals? Again, not a research problem in here. This statement shows the presumed answer, but it entirely ignores the problem, which is underlying the fact that 9 out of 10 proposals fail. So again, the statement looks into the solution end, like we need to do something, rather than trying to understand what is happening here. Why are 9 out of 10 proposals failing? I mean, it then could be, of course, a strategy to increase the number of proposals that you write just so to get the 5 that you need to have funded through. But still, it makes you a very bad proposal writer. So why are you so bad at that? What is going wrong in here? This is a problem below that should be looked at, rather than asking, what shall we do? So what characteristics are there for a research problem? First of all, and in a nutshell, to put you on the safe side, a situation that is broken. It's not supposed to be like that, right? And ideally, you can see some cause and effect relationships so that you can work towards the root of the problem. It has some boundaries, or boundaries need to be established so that you can express the problem in a short and precise sentence. And this is something that you only will manage gradually. It's not uncommon for the starting point of the research that you need like 15 to 20 minutes to explain what is it exactly that your research is doing. What is the research problem? At the end of your research journey, likely you will be able to verbalize that in a single sentence. Also, a research problem is real. It's not abstract. It's also not hypothetical. It's based on observations and on evidence. And it can be either the starting point of the research process, something that's very well understood, or it might be the end point of the research. If you feel that something is not right, but you still can't tell what it actually is, then that's fine, but it means that your research will focus for most of the time just understanding what the research problem here actually is. Now, defining a research problem can be a challenging thing. And if you have come along the work of Richard Feynman, then you will know that sentence that when writing down research, the most difficult thing is often to define the problem. And he used to say, write down the problem, think very hard, write down the answer. So thinking is a part of it, writing down the problem and writing down the answer. That sounds simple, right? Let's look into that again. Originally answered, let's take that example. What do you think of Richard Feynman's problem-solving algorithm? Write down the problem, think very hard, write down the answers. This is, of course, out of context. One would need insight as how he would think very hard. He was certainly a physicist of a different feather and was often referred to as a magician for good reasons. As I understand it, think very hard from his perspective meant imagine the known processes involved as they take place in nature and attempt to ferret out the problem as if the process in question would fit into the known like a piece in a jigsaw puzzle. This is done by taking into consideration systems and properties already known and understood. It would probably involve a process of elimination, much as a physician diagnosed disease by ruling out possibilities. So this is to say, you look into cause and effect possibilities, rule out everything that you know, like why is there such a high fluctuation rate in your organization? Why do so many people quit within 1 year? Now you know the human resource department is perhaps not providing the right support. You know that the leadership team is not treating employees fair. You know that the salary is not as good as with the competition. So all of that is evidence that you hold for this type of research problem that you could already write up, and that becomes part of your initial equation. So this is part of the think hard and write down the problem as you understand it. Yeah. So it's a very structured process, and it is very much focused on the problem, and it is not looking into the solution end. So writing down the problem sounds trivial, but it's often the hard part. Once you understand the question, the answer is obvious. So this is something, in hindsight, your research will be clear. Once you know what the problem was, once you know exactly all of the causes and reasons for the problem to occur, once you will have read the literature, then the outcome expectation on how to fix the problem, on how to solve it, that will be clear. But initially, the entire thinking and work will be on the problem end. And for that, you need to bound the problem and to think about it in abstract terms before attempting to construct a solution. Now, this is very important. So boundaries and what is it exactly that the problem constitute must be established. Now with this, let's look into whether the research problem is a start point or the end point of your research journey. Now, if the research problem is relatively clear to you, then likely it constitutes a starting point. If it's very vague, you might need to focus your research on developing a clear understanding about what the exact problem is. And in the second case, the research problem will be the end of your research, means the knowledge has been constructed, and you will have a clear understanding what this is about. And yes, this is about deductive and inductive reasoning, or research more generally. Now, let's go back to the example from a minute ago on the organization is showing a high fluctuation rate as a leadership team is lacking people management skills. Now, this is a clear example. There's a high fluctuation rate, and the reason for this high fluctuation rate is that there's a leadership team in place that has no people management skills. Now, it's a sort of broken situation. It's certainly not meant for the leadership team to not have management skills, people management skills in particular. Yes? And there's a clear cause and effect relationship in place that can be also verbalized in this precise manner. And we are drawing on initial observations, and evidence. So the organization is showing 1 out of 2 employees is quitting within a year. So this is a clear evidence base over which to start. Now, and while the problem seems to be clear, the reason why the leadership team is lacking people management skills is perhaps very much unknown. So this is what this research will aim to find out. So this is exactly the problem focusing side. So we are not asking how to reduce fluctuation rates. That is not part of the research. That would be our outcome expectation, the solution, but it is not what the research will do. Remember the initial slide? On the problem end, Sam was hitting his head, and now he needs an ice pack to get his head not hurting any longer. Now, why was Sam hitting his head? Why is there a leadership team that is lacking people management skills? who was hiring management teams without people management skills. So what is going on in here? Now, an example for the research problem at the endpoint, the problem as initially perceived. And this is from a research student of mine from some years ago, and down there is a source to the thesis. So the information is available, and if you want to read it in a context, be welcome. The institutions of higher education have a desire to create a diverse student body to provide students with a multicultural environment. To allow for this, institutions often use race-conscious admission practices. Means they want to have a lot of different cultures in there. So they thought, okay, race-conscious admission is a good way to assure for that. So consequently, affirmative action in higher education is promoted through the use of an admission program that accords preferences on the basis of characteristics desired in incoming classes, like race and ethnicity. However, the practice of considering race within higher education admission is technically illegal because it violates federal and state legislation. But it has been allowed by the Supreme Court to be used in limited situations. The existing legislation creates a complicated legal framework that must be understood in order to operate without undertaking illegal activities. So this is a case that one of our students was facing. And now let's look at that further. The problem as it was initially perceived, the problem was perceived as a complex situation where the student as an admission officer was asked, it's part of the job role, to create a diverse student body. Means someone is coming to you and said, look, we need to have a lot of cultural backgrounds in here. That's good for our university. It will allow for multicultural and rich learning. Now, okay, this is the objective of the university. I'm as an admission officer asked to use some sort of race-conscious admission practices, but this is technically illegal. So we have here conflicting things, because if doing so, I would violate legislation. But in some circumstances, the Supreme Court allowed it. So it's not entirely out, like if it's for something good, it might be used. Now, is this just a complex situation that the admission practitioner is dealing with? Or is it something that shows something broke and where there is something to be researched? Now, as it turns out, some years later, at the end of the research, what the student found out, and once the problem was really understood, that affirmative action in college admissions is a continuous topic which has inspired a significant amount of legislation affecting its use. This legislation exists independently at the state and at the federal levels. But when viewed together, means both end, the state level and the federal level, within the entire legislative framework, individual pieces of legislation contradict each other. So this is providing confusing and conflicting legal guidance for higher education admission counselors. Admission counselors' daily activities are governed by this legislation, but without a high level of knowledge or awareness of the admission counselors, they could unknowingly engage in recruiting activities that violate one or more aspects of the related legislation. So what was really broken here in this situation was that there is contradicting legislation at the state level and at the federal level. So this was the root of the problem that only was fully understood after the research was concluded 5 years after. So the problem focus the entire time has been on figuring out what is it that is not working in here. And after the end of the research, you have had the way of solving the problem because you understood all what was needed was a training of admission counselors on the existence of contradicting legislations and therefore taking informed decision of what can be done and what cannot, right? So you see, a focus on the problem still leads to a solution, but the way of work is that you focus on why Sam was hitting his head. If you came late to this webinar, please take a look at the first slide where Sam was hitting his head. Now, the problem is ultimately understood, different legislation at the state and federal levels, and it was contradicting. So you can express and verbalize in a very precise manner what the problem is, but only at the end of the research. Now let's look into the solution bias and the role of habits. Doctoral students often draw on their day-to-day experience and practice, and this leads them to struggle to craft a research problem, because the day-to-day experience that you usually have, once you're a doctoral student, you're already not in the primary school, first and second class, where you know what a problem is. No, you're framed by your day-to-day environment, and this is asking you to solve problems. So all the tinkering and inquiry and exploration of the early years has been gradually educated out once you graduate from school. And therefore, you're trimmed to work towards solution. And it's not already so obvious to you what is a problem here, because you're for years not related to looking at problems, but rather in looking in solutions. So, and many of the guides that are found on the web, they aren't helpful either. And they mislead you, as we will look into it in the closing of this webinar. So this is why it is hard for the start to work over the problem end. Habits and routines have a very strong impact on your day-to-day actions. The other thing is that solutions are exciting, while problems are not, especially those solutions that you are part of creating. So the ideas behind them, even if they are not your own, implementing a new solution is an intellectual turn-on. It gives you a stimulus. So this is why it's natural to lean towards the solution end rather than leaning towards the problem end. And if you're in the work environment and already grown up, then a lot of times you're asked to fix things. So that is sort of a solution consultants. We know a problem, right? We see a certain solution that has worked. Sam was hitting his head, we give him an ice pack, right? So we usually end up promoting that way of behaving because we know it has worked in the past, right? But this is not the way research should be working at. So we need to get rid of old habits and quick ways of acting. And the exciting in here is a real problematic aspect. We see a problem and rush to build a solution. We do everything in our power to bring this idea to life. But then we often miss the mark. In reality, we should focus on the problems intently. By understanding the real underlying causes of trouble for customers, we can build the right solution. Now you see, this is a quote that comes out of the work environment. So it's not entirely unknown, but it's not that creating a solution quickly is a bad thing. However, it is when it's the wrong solution. To what solution? To what problem is it a solution? Right? Now, this is what needs to be understood. And think of it, product managers are doing themselves and their customers a disservice when they don't spend enough time on understanding the problem in great detail. Now, I understand that in the work environment, this is a luxus that you might not have because you have KPIs where your work colleague is perhaps performing better, just providing solutions than you, if you just spend too much time on thinking about what the real problem is. You certainly don't want to be out of job, right? But if you undertake research, understand there's a difference in between solution and problem, and you're expected to stay at the area where Sam was hitting his head. And worse than excitement is once excitement meets opportunities. We see a problem and rush to build a solution when we sense opportunities. Think about it. Digitalization, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, deep learning, right? So many opportunities. We need to be quick there. We need to size them. But this is often just making things worse. And I've been working with students for many, many years that just want to know how to take advantage of the Internet of Things. Now, taking advantage of the Internet of Things, obviously, is not looking into any problem, right? And I think this must be understood. So The current quest for digitalization is a perfect example of that. New markets, players, tools, services, processes, means, business model, and a lot of challenges and opportunities. So, but at the end of the day, if you look at it from a problem perspective, there's nothing really new in there, right? Everything comes as an emergence. So there's a state of the art in research, but that research is built on other state of the art. So from a research perspective, it's not that exciting, and you can clearly isolate what is just rush and noise and what is new and deserves attention. Now then, how do we keep a problem focus? As a matter of fact, it's quite safe. We already talked about excitement and opportunities. Yeah, that's everything that gives you adrenaline, that makes you jump. You want to be there as quickly as possible. Now, if Sam has hit his head and it's perhaps bleeding, and it's bleeding badly, and he perhaps lost his eye, you don't want to spend much time in that situation. It's dark, right? You perhaps call an ambulance and want to have Sam as quickly as possible be in the hospital. Now, but you don't feel good. There's no excitement in that situation. Likewise, if you're working in that toxic organization that has a high fluctuation rate, and you see that each year 50% of your colleagues resign, you don't want to be there, right? That's not a healthy environment. It's toxic. So this is a research end. It's dark. And this is, from a research perspective, is exactly where you want to focus. The dark side is where things are broken, and you're going to figure out why is it broken. Yeah? If things only look bright and shiny, consider more closely at what your actual focus is. Are you dealing with a problem? The bright side is the way you would like it to be. Yes, it's a desired outcome. But to get to the bright side, you need to remove the dark. Sam was hitting his head. He almost lost his eye. He's bleeding. He needs to go to the hospital. So you need to understand the darkness. Why is Sam always hitting his head? So, in other words, the recommended path for filling out a lean canvas is starting with a problem customer segment quadrant. But if you already carry a picture of a hammer in your hand, the danger is framing all problems as nails. Instead of brutally forcing your solution, reframed as problems, on your customer segment, start by defining the bigger compelling context for your customers. Remember the earlier example, the problem is that we need. This is exactly having the hammer in the hand. Instead of spelling out what the problem is, you just say is, the problem is we need a nail, right? So check what side is it that you are on. So how to break them, the solution-focused habits? They are very strong, right? So perhaps for the start, focus on the context, not on tools, like why was Sam hitting his head? Reflection instead of action, not so quickly. Yeah? Reflect what has been happening here. Why was Sam hitting his head? Critical analytics. Look at Sam's head. What is it here? So there are no beliefs and desires. It's a process focus, not an outcome focus. The outcome is what you want, but the process is what is happening here. It's questioning over concluding. Yeah? That's not the problem as we need. That's the concluding part. So what is the problem? That's the questioning part. Engage with stakeholders that were seeing, for example, how Sam was hitting his head. Yeah, and likely there are many other things, but do not rush. I think is very important. Everything that triggers rush in you means you're very likely driven by expectation, by excitement, by opportunities. Yeah? If it's not a fire that's burning, that make you running away, think about it. Why do I rush? Yeah? Many doctoral students are very quick to try and put together their methods of choice. It's like, day one. And they are quick to develop a questionnaire, and then I will ask that. But why? Why are you doing that? Research is a very structured process. Why do you need to ask that question? Was no one asking that question so far? And if not, why do you bother today? Right? So advance gradually over the points that become clear to you. Be it related research, stick to related research. Research builds on state of the art. Yeah, which methods have been used in such research? And could that be adopted by you? And which data and observations do exist? And why do I need to collect more? So those are all things that take time. It's not that exciting, admittedly, but this is how research works. And only then take informed actions. Now, we come into a perhaps not so well understood part. Understand the solution bias of search tools and in information, which is a bit scary. Now, if you ask, dear Google, for what is a solution bias, which basically is what this webinar today is about, you get an amazing 8,680 hits. Really? Now you need to be damn sure that something like a solution bias exists, right? On the other hand, I'm going to mute everyone because we get some background noise else. On the other hand, if you Google for business solutions, you get an amazing amount of 7 million something hits. Okay, that's already much better. And if you look for a solution business, you still get 3 million something hits. Now, let's look into that. Compare solution bias to business solution. I said, you need to be damn sure that something like a solution bias exists. And Google is damn sure that something like a business solution exists. Okay. But more scary than that, Google is damn sure that something like a solution business exists. What the heck is a solution business? Let's look into that, what Google suggested is. Building a platform for organic growth, published by Springer. Wow. But if you look into that, nonsense. Let's go further. Solution business model. Really? A solution business model? Okay. What does a business solution company do? What is a business solution company? Right? Do we talk about consultants? Well, but okay, Google, I see it. 3 million hits. Are solutions becoming a problem for your business? So it's a business branch, perhaps? And as a Bridgestone corporation, wow, it's an entire market. Now you see the type of results that Google is providing you with. Well, that's a bit scary. We are framed by solutions in an apparent solution-driven world, and algorithms aren't different. In a world where confusing terms such as solution business are 394 times more indexed by Google than the term solution bias. Now, you've managed to find today's webinar. That's already not so bad, right? You must have been damn sure that it's worthwhile showing up here. There are only 8,000 something hits on Google on that word anyway. Staying on the dark side can serve you well as a tool to evaluate whether you are focusing on the research problem or not. This is perhaps most obvious if you want to know where you are. Yeah, you don't need to call it dark side. It might also be something like, it is not as it should be. It is hurting, it is painful, it is broke, it makes you feel bad. Yeah. So if you want to control yourself, work over that side. Don't trust the information provided by you through search engines. Now, as we come to the closing, let's look into problems and research problems. And yes, there's a difference. No, problems are research problems. There's a difference in between a problem as such and a problem to you. Yeah? While the problem to you might bother you, it might not qualify as a research problem. You see the below, bankruptcy and fraud, certainly nothing that you want, right? So is it just a problem or a research problem? Now, if my company goes bankrupt, then this is my problem. It's not a problem as such. The economic system, the legal system has been designed in a way that foresees bankruptcy. So the situation is a problem to me, but it's not a research problem. Nothing is broken in here. I'm perhaps broken. I'm run out of money. Yeah, but there's nothing broken in there. But if the bankruptcy was caused by fraud, then the situation would change. Fraud was not meant to be a formal process of the economic system. And we might disagree here, but let's assume that for most countries, it's not meant to be part of the formal system. And then we would have a research problem, right? So as we close today's webinar, we finally come into the role of guides and the different lenses that we might use to interpret these. So what is the issue with the guide on the right side? Well, you know what's happening once a big blue elephant is in the room? Exactly, it's in the room now. So your focus will now be on the big blue elephant. So tell me, what do you expect to get out of a guide about problem solving? Right? Is it how to examine a problem or how to solve a problem? So you combine two words immediately that bias the first word towards the letter. If you connect problem solving, what you will be focusing on is solving a problem. Sam was hitting his head. Where is iceberg? I need eyes. Right? So the authors of such guides are typically experienced scientists, so they do not mean it bad. They don't want to mislead you, but they know how science works. They are very, very damn sure about the solution bias. They are those few that will go for that 8,000 words that Google puts out. But that also means they are very remote and far away from where you are. They write guides with their lenses, which is a problem-focused lens, and you read the same guide with a solution-focused lens. Moreover, those guides often ask you for things that you could simply not know at that point of time. You recall the example of the conflicting legislation, which was a problem for admission practices. Now, this was knowledge that only was created 5 years after the research started. So at the starting point, this student would not have known what significance or background to that issue if you not even know what the issue is. How can you know what's significant, what's background, what's relevant literature? Now, it's clear that the introduction chapter comes first, but what's perhaps not so clear is that it only can be finalized by the time that the chapter 6 conclusion has been completed. Now, we dedicated a webinar to the non-linearity of research. If this is something new to you, then please take a look into that. Research is not linear. It's presented in a linear way, but that's about it. Now, if you want to advance your understanding on research problem and the solution bias, then check out our advanced training course on issue identification, problematizing, and research question framing. It comes in 3 formats. It's available, free, without any cost for self-studying. So all of the content, all of the activities you can work through on your own pace. Or if you need a bit more support, you can get a tutor either fully or with on demand. So be welcome to check that out. And as we come into the group activity and close the webinar, we will now stop the recording